Autumn of 1888, just outside Hays, Kansas. Wind scraped across the plains like it had somewhere to be. Cold and dry, it moved through broken cottonwoods and snagged at what little was left of the wheat stubble. The moon had been full earlier in the night, but was slipping westward now, dulled behind a stretch of cloud that looked like smoke from a far-off fire. The road was hardly more than a trail rutted and bitter underfoot. No lamps, no fence line, just blackness ahead and behind and the sound of her children's breathing, shallow and frightened. Mara held her daughter in one arm and gripped her son's hand with the other. The baby, not yet two, whimpered now and then, but mostly lay quiet against her cheek against Mara's collarbone. Jasper, nearly 5, stumbled more than he walked. The boy hadn't cried. Not yet. But every so often he looked up at his mother with wide, wet eyes, and Mara would nod just once to let him know they were still moving. Still going somewhere. Still alive. The hem of her dress had torn hours ago. Her boots, borrowed from a neighbor woman long gone east, pinched and split at the toe. Her shoulder ached from holding the baby, and her back was stiff tight with cold. She no longer noticed the pain, not really. It was like her grief, permanent now. Just something she carried. They had left the house before midnight, slipping out the back where the fields began. No one saw them. That mattered. If Joe's brother came back early, if he found the place empty, he'd think she ran. That's fine. Let him think it. She had. But she hadn't run away. She had walked. She walked like a woman who'd made peace with being hollowed out. Like a woman who'd bled too long to notice one more wound. Her legs moved from some old part of her that remembered work, remembered days on the homestead when her first husband was alive, and mornings meant bread baking and the smell of wet soil, not screams and slammed doors and children hiding under beds. There had been a time when she'd loved Kansas. The wide skies, the hush before rain, the wheat when it was new and gold. But now the land felt like it watched her with tired eyes. She couldn't tell if it pitied her or blamed her. She thought of Amos, her first, thought of the way he used to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear with that rough hand of his, always stained from work. She hadn't cried for him in over a year, but tonight, somewhere out past grief and fear, she did. The tears came hot, surprising her. She bent her head so the children wouldn't see. A coyote called out far off. The baby stirred. Just wind, she whispered, pressing her lips to her daughter's temple. Just wind and nothing more. They kept walking. Hours passed like that. The stars dimmed and the sky slowly paled. Mara's limbs felt carved from stone. Jasper began to stumble more often, his knees hitting hard ground, and she'd stop, pick him up, hold both children as long as she could bear before setting him down again. He said nothing, just clung to her skirt and kept going. Somewhere around dawn they reached the bend where the old cattle trail met the east ridge. That's where she saw it. A light, soft yellow, wavering like candle glow in a lantern. At first she thought it might be a trick of the wind, maybe the sunrise playing games, but no, it was real. Low to the ground. Still. She froze. The baby shifted and Jasper looked up. "What is it, Mama?" She didn't answer. Her breath caught in her throat. Then came the sound of a horse's snort. A saddle creaking. A man stepped out from the dark. He had the kind of stillness that said he knew how to listen. Tall. Dust on his coat, on his boots. A rifle slung behind his shoulder, but his hands were empty. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, quiet like a man trying not to spook a colt. Mara couldn't speak. Couldn't think of anything that wouldn't sound like a lie. So she didn't lie? She just nodded. Then her knees buckled and the world tilted sideways. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the man moving fast toward her, his face unreadable in the half-light. When Mara came to, she was lying on something soft, A bedroll maybe, or a coat. The baby was no longer in her arms, and for one white-hot second panic slammed into her chest. Then she heard her daughter's soft whimper, heard her boy whispering, "It's all right, Mama's right there." She opened her eyes. The sky was the color of ash, now pale with morning. The man was crouched near a small fire, hands busy over a blackened coffee pot. He hadn't looked over yet. Beside him sat both children, Jasper swaddled in a thick blanket he hadn't had before, and the baby bundled tight, nestled in the crook of the man's arm like she belonged there. Like this wasn't strange. Mara tried to sit up. The motion sent fire lancing through her spine. Her mouth was dry. Her lips were cracked. Still, she got herself up, slow and careful, every breath feeling like it scraped her raw. The man turned at the sound. He didn't smile, didn't ask questions, just nodded once and said, "Morning." She studied his face then, now that the light let her. Not young. Not old either. Somewhere in that middle place where life had carved its marks, but left strength behind. He had deep-set eyes, dark and quiet, and a jaw dusted with graying stubble. His coat was sheepskin, worn thin at the seams, and his hat lay beside him, damp with frost. She found her voice rough and low. "Where are we?" "Couple miles east of Dry Creek." "My camp." He poured something into a tin cup and held it toward her. "Coffee. Not good, but warm." She didn't take it. "Not yet." "My kids?" "Fine," he said. "Cold, hungry, but fine." He glanced at Jasper. "You got a brave one there. Didn't say a word, just sat beside me like we'd met before." Jasper looked at her, unsure. "It's all right," she told him, finally taking the coffee. Her fingers trembled around the cup, but the heat steadied her. "He don't talk much. Not since." She stopped herself. The man didn't press, just poked at the fire with a stick. "Name's Ely Barrett," he said. "Rancher. I was riding fence when I saw you three cross the ridge." Mara hesitated. "Mara Ellison." He nodded again, like he already knew that name, though he gave no sign of it. She drank the coffee. It was bitter, burnt, but it worked its way through her like medicine. The baby had fallen asleep again, her head tucked under Eli's coat. He adjusted it gently so her cheek wouldn't press the buttons. "You feed her?" Mara asked, her voice sharp with sudden shame. He shook his head. She cried some. Gave her sugar water from my flask, just enough to quiet her. She looked down at her hands, red and raw. "I didn't mean to faint." "I reckon you didn't." Silence took them a while. Finally he asked, "Where were you headed?" She stared past him. "Past the fire. Anywhere that wasn't there." Eli didn't ask what there was. Mara felt the words rising the way bad dreams rise in sleep, unasked. She didn't speak them. She just reached down and rubbed Jasper's shoulder. The boy leaned into her. His hands were warmer now. "You got people?" Eli asked. She shook her head. "Used to." "Trouble." She didn't answer, but he didn't need one. Her face said enough. The bruises that hadn't quite faded, the way she flinched at noise, how she kept glancing at the horizon like something might come riding after them. "I've got a place," he said. "Small house. Just me. Couple hands come and go. Could get you warm, rest up a day or two. Then we figure something." Mara narrowed her eyes. "Why?" His jaw moved slightly, but he didn't look away. "Because I got no use for leaving a woman and her kids out here to die." It wasn't charity in his voice. It wasn't pity. It was flat and plain, like the offer of a shovel when the earth was hard and you had something that needed burying. She stared at him a while longer. Then she said, "All right." He nodded, poured more coffee into her cup, and threw another branch on the fire. The wind picked up again, but it no longer sounded like loneliness. Just the world breathing. If the trail tested you, subscribe and ride again. Eli's horse was a broad-shouldered bay gelding, patient and steady. He had a wide saddle with an old army blanket strapped behind and saddlebags heavy with tools and fence wire. Mara watched as he lashed his gear tighter, then offered her the blanket. "You ride? I'll walk," he said. "You hold the little one. The boy can sit in front of you." Mara hesitated. The baby was awake now, fussing softly. Jasper clung to her skirt again, eyes wary. "I can walk." "You have walked," he said. "All night? This way's faster." He didn't raise his voice, didn't command it like a man used to getting his way. But the tone was firm, and something in it cut through her stubbornness. She let him lift Jasper up first, then climbed on behind. Her thighs ached from the movement, and the saddle felt foreign under her, too high, too rigid, but she adjusted the baby against her chest and held Jasper close. Eli took the reins and walked ahead, the horse following with an easy rhythm. The trail sloped downward toward a line of bare trees, and beyond that, a patch of land where the earth looked darker, better watered maybe. A windmill stood crooked in the distance, half turning in the morning breeze. They traveled in silence. The horses' hooves thunked soft against the frozen soil. A hawk circled overhead. Now and then Eli looked back to check on them, but he didn't speak unless he needed to. She was grateful for that. Mara watched the land as they moved, wide and wind-bent. Patches of frost still clung to the grass and shadows. A creek bed ran shallow through the valley, mostly dry this late in the year. The openness of it all, the way the sky just kept going, made her feel small and scared in a way she hadn't expected. But she didn't regret leaving. She thought of the house she'd fled, the way Joe's brother had filled it with the smell of rot gut and sweat, the way he shouted over nothing, how Jasper had stopped talking the night he'd hit him for dropping a tin cup, how the baby had begun to flinch every time boots struck the porch. Mara had taken too long to leave. She knew that. But when she walked out into the cold last night, she felt a clarity she hadn't known in years, like stepping into ice water and waking up for the first time. Eli's cabin came into view around mid-morning. It wasn't much, just a squat wooden house, one room across with a lean-to on the side. A barn stood nearby, half slumped from snow damage, and a pair of goats watched them from behind a crooked fence. "This is it," Eli said, pulling the horse to a stop. He helped her down first, then Jasper. The boy clutched his hand for a moment, uncertain, until Eli pointed toward the goats and said, "Those two will stare you down, but they won't bite. You gotta keep your coat away from 'em, though. One of 'em eats buttons." Jasper almost smiled. Inside the cabin was spare but clean. A stove with a little heat still in it, a low table, one chair, a bed in the corner with wool blankets, a shelf with books that looked well read. Tools hung on nails along the wall. One of the panes in the window was cracked and patched with wax paper. Mara stepped inside like a trespasser. She didn't sit. Eli knelt by the stove and stirred the ashes. "Wood's out back. I'll get more. You warm up in here. I'll bring food. You live here by yourself. Used to be me and my brother." He didn't stay long. She looked at him, curious. Wasn't the land, just life. Got tired of being broke, I guess. Went south. Haven't heard since. Mara nodded slowly. "I know how that sounds." He stood and gave her a long look, then walked back out without another word. The silence inside was thick, but it wasn't hostile. Jasper wandered to the books and ran a finger over the spines. The baby had fallen asleep again, warm against her chest. Mara looked at the bed, then at the door, and finally sat down on the floor with her back to the wall. She didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She just breathed and let herself feel the strangeness of safety. By late afternoon, Ellie had the stove crackling and a pot of beans bubbling with salt pork and a pinch of something green she couldn't name. He handed her a bowl, then gave a smaller one to Jasper, who ate slow but steady, chewing like it was work that needed doing. The baby had taken milk from a tin Ellie found in his stores, mixed warm and careful. After she'd slept again, breathing deep, her small hand curled in a fist near Mara's collar. Eli didn't sit at the table. He ate standing near the door, as if he meant to keep watch. The air inside the cabin smelled of smoke and stew and dust. It wasn't pleasant exactly, but it felt like something real. After supper he stepped outside and Mara heard him splitting wood. The rhythm of it was measured and sure. She wrapped her daughter tighter in the blanket and sat with her back against the wall, feet drawn under her. "You married?" she asked when he came back in snow on his shoulders. "No. Never. No." She nodded like that told her something. "Maybe it did. You ever want to?" He looked at her eyes, unreadable. "Used to think I might." She waited. But that was all he said. Later, after the children were asleep in the bed, and Mara sat near the stove with her hands around a tin mug, he spoke again. "My folks had a farm outside Abilene. Grew corn till the water ran out. My mother passed when I was 15. My brother was 12. We stayed on after Pa left. Made do with what was left behind." She studied his face in the firelight. There was something in it, hard years maybe, loneliness, but not bitterness. "You raise your brother." "Best I could." "You miss him?" He nodded. "Some days more than others." Mara thought about what it meant to stay, what it meant to leave. She thought of Amos buried in a cemetery with no stone, just a wooden cross she carved herself. She thought of Joe's brother and the deep, unending quiet that came after a slammed door. Thought of how Jasper had stopped looking people in the eye. "You believe in God?" she asked. Eli took his time before answering. "Some days more than others." She smiled at that. A small, tired smile. "You talk like a man who doesn't mind silence." "I don't," he said, "but I listen close." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in a long time. They spoke little after that. When the stove burned low, she curled up on a wool blanket with the baby. Eli gave her the bed. Said he'd sleep in the lean-to with the goats in his saddle. She didn't argue. Didn't thank him either. Some things didn't need saying. The next day she helped him haul water from the well. Her hands blistered again, but she didn't complain. She boiled clothes in a big pot and hung them out where the wind whipped them stiff. She patched one of Jasper's shirts, tore old cloth for rags, swept the floor until the dust was nothing but a fine memory. Eli didn't praise her for it, and she didn't expect him to. But he noticed. She could tell by the way he left tools out for her to use, or how he started putting a second mug beside the stove every morning without asking. The children settled, slowly, like animals learning the limits of a fence. Jasper started asking questions again, quiet ones usually, about the goats. The baby laughed once, sharp and sudden, at a bird outside the window. Mara watched them with a tightness in her chest she didn't have words for. Something like grief, but lighter. Not joy exactly. Just room. That night, after the children were asleep, Eli brought out a deck of cards. "You play?" he asked. "I used to." They played in silence except for the soft shuffle of the cards. She lost every hand, but he didn't gloat. When he stood to bank the fire, he paused. "You could stay," he said. "Longer than a few days, I mean. No strings. Just a roof, some work, a bit of rest." She looked up at him, face unreadable. "Why?" He looked at her like he had that first morning, cautious, but not cold. "Because this land's big. And there's enough quiet in it for two people to start again if they want." Mara didn't answer. Not then. She just looked at the fire and let the silence stretch long between them. But she didn't say no. They fell into a rhythm that didn't need explaining. Mornings started early with coffee and wood smoke and the sound of goats calling from the pen. Eli would feed them and check the traps he set near the creek. Mara would boil water, cook oats, sweep the cabin, tend to the baby. Jasper followed Eli, sometimes quiet as a shadow, watching everything. Nobody said what they were building, but the shape of it formed anyway. Eli had a barn wall to fix, and Mara held boards steady while he nailed them in place. She didn't flinch at the sound of the hammer, and he noticed. He didn't say it aloud, but she saw the look in his eyes, respect, not pity. She asked to help mend a fence line, and he handed her gloves without hesitation. The work was rough. Cold air stung her skin, and the wire bit deep. Her palms bled. She wrapped them and kept working. "Most men can't take half that," he muttered once. "I'm not most men," she said without looking up. That made him smile. At night they played cards. She started winning. Not often, but just enough to make him raise an eyebrow once or twice. He never called her a cheat, and she never gloated. But something passed between them, unspoken half-smiles, small glances that lingered too long. She asked about the books on the shelf. He told her he used to read when the winters got long. Said he liked stories where people lost everything and still kept moving. "I used to write," she said one night, surprising herself. He looked up from his cards. "Not anything worth reading. Just little things. Letters I never sent. A prayer or two." He nodded, thoughtful. "You ought to again. I wouldn't know how to start." "Same way you start walking," he said. One foot, then the other. Jasper began to talk more too. He asked Eli if goats could have names. Ellie said sure, if you wanted to be disappointed when they ignored you. Jasper named one Buttons anyway. The other he called Pickle. Eli built the boy a small wooden horse out of scrap. Rough, lopsided, but sturdy. Jasper rode it through the cabin like a proper cowboy. The baby clapped and squealed, and Mara laughed until she cried. It had been a long time since the sound of her own joy didn't scare her. But not all days were easy. One afternoon, Mara spotted a man riding the ridge. Too far to see clearly, but the shape of him froze her breath. Tall, slouched in the saddle, moving slow. The kind of slow that meant watching, not traveling. She said nothing, but Eli noticed her face. "You know him?" "Don't know yet." He nodded and left it there. That night he cleaned his rifle at the table, careful and quiet. Mara put the children to bed without a word. The next morning Eli didn't go out to ride the fence. He stayed close instead. Worked on the barn roof. Mara made stew and mended one of Jasper's socks. Neither spoke of the man on the ridge. But the peace in her chest, that new space she'd found, felt thinner now. Like a window left open in winter. And when Eli brought in more firewood than usual, stacking it by the door, she didn't ask why. That night she stood outside after the children were asleep, wrapped in her shawl, looking at the stars. The sky stretched wide and black above her, the kind of sky that made a person feel both seen and forgotten. Eli stepped up beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Used to. Why didn't you?" He shrugged. "Didn't like what I saw when I looked elsewhere." She nodded. "I used to think the world was big enough to hold me. Now I think maybe it always was. I just kept choosing places that weren't meant for me." He glanced at her, then back at the dark. "I reckon this place is big enough." Mara didn't answer, but she stayed beside him longer than she meant to. And when she went inside, she felt the chill less. Still, she slept with her boots near the bed, just in case. The man on the ridge came back 2 days later. This time he rode closer. Eli was out behind the lean-to fixing a busted hinge on the goat pen when Mara saw the rider again, cresting the eastern hills slow and easy, like he had all the time in the world. Sun caught on a bit of metal at his side. Not enough to see a face, but enough to know the shape of him was wrong. Ellie noticed her go still. He stood, turned, and followed her eyes. Then he handed her the baby. "Go inside." She obeyed, heart pounding hard enough to feel in her throat. She pulled Jasper in from the porch and bolted the door, then moved to the window. Through the wavering glass she saw Eli take his rifle from